this is the Designing Inclusive Games panel. I'm David Rosen from Wolfire Games. And
I'm Elizabeth Zelle. I work at Volition, best known for the Saints Row series, where I am a player experience researcher.
And I'm Christine Love. I'm an analog historian at 8+, and I do basically everything except art and music. I love console games.
alright. So how many game developers are here? How many game players?
That was a test.
So we have kind of a small panel today, so we could take questions at any time if you want to raise your hand like that. So I guess the first thing is we could talk about what does it mean for a game to be inclusive if we're talking about designing inclusive games. And the first thing I think about is just all these montages we see that just have the protagonist of every game, which is always the bald, white, angry-looking dude. So the first issue is just that games tend to have like the same character, who doesn't really have anything to him. And I think it would just be more interesting if we had just different kinds of characters, just at least for variety, and to not exclude different players of different genders and races.
The way I look at it is that the gaming community itself is extremely diverse, and that's wonderful. It's one of the best things about the gaming community. And it would be fantastic if the games themselves would reflect some of the diversity, even a small percentage of the diversity that you see, in the community. You guys are the ones that buy the games. You're the ones who kind of dictate what games should be made and what games should look like. And I personally would love to see games move forward and try and reflect, the fan bases that are out there. There are obviously a number of different ways you can increase the diversity inside of your own games. And the way we've handled it specifically, Volition, is we obviously go for the customization angle. You can go through the game playing our default male character and you get the swaggering, white straight guy that everybody else knows from every other game. But that doesn't have to be your main character. Your main character can be anything, anyone. It can look like anything or anyone, and every NPC in the game will still treat you like you are equally a badass.
I feel like for me, I'm not super interested in the question of inclusivity so much as I am just as a player. I found that there weren't that many games being made that were specifically trying to appeal to me. There's certain things that are just completely locked off. Like romancing games to a lesbian is just for a long time now it's just there is nothing. There is literally nothing. So really my approach has just been I make the stuff that I want to see. And I figure that there are probably a substantial number of players out there who also would like to see those things. I'm shocked. And so I've just found that making games, I've made games with me in mind, with with lesbians in mind, and it turns out that actually, just by being interesting and different, that appeals to all sorts of straight people too. I have straight fans, bizarrely enough. Apparently making games for gay girls doesn't actually alienate everyone. It turns out you can actually sell your games just based off being interesting. Who knew?
Did you change anything in particular to make it appeal to straight people, or?
I begrudgingly acknowledge their existence. Well, so one of the first games I made, it was it just had a female love interest, and I never really thought about the idea that, oh sure, probably some men are going to play this too, until I got interviewed by a publication that will remain nameless. But they were very concerned that because the game had a female love interest, did this mean that it's only for men? So now my games explicitly ask the player's gender, just so you're aware. No, this is made with women totally can also romance that girl. I just want the straight people to realize, no, you're not special.
Yeah, we went for romance options in Saints Row 4, as anyone who's played the game might have experienced. Obviously it was kind of poking fun at certain other series and their romance options. This is Saints Row. What we do is poke fun at everyone and everything constantly. So he wasn't calling anybody out specifically, with a stern finger. But we really early on, it was never a question whether or not the romance options would be available to everybody. We did not care. That was part of our thing, is that, yeah, we are going to have female characters that are romanceable, and male characters that are romanceable, and robots that are romanceable. And there will be no respect at all given to the gender of the player character. Everybody can be romanced by everybody. And it even creates an interesting situation with one of our NPCs, Pierce, who his line when you romance him is, "I normally don't swing that way." She plays for both men and women characters, which then makes you wonder which way does Pierce normally swing.
Yes.
So customization is definitely one option, where you can just choose who the player is. Because you kind of have to go out of your way to bar certain combinations if you're going to, so you might as well just allow them all. But do you think it's also important to have games that are specifically for same-sex romance, or is it enough to make it customizable?
Well, I'm currently working on a game that has a lesbian protagonist and only and mostly women love interests. So yeah, I do feel like it's important to not just have games that are supposed to be about putting the player into whatever situation that represents them as a person, but also making people go outside of their comfort zone, step into other people's shoes. Making that explicitly not only available but required, I think has a lot of value to it. And there's also just you can only do so much with the player's character when they're supposed to be playing as themselves. You can only put them in so much of an uncomfortable position. And at the end of the day, they're just going, oh yeah, this is me. I would totally do this the right way. This is how I would play things. And I think it gives people, more room to experiment when you're specifically putting them into a role that is not necessarily something they chose. It gives them an excuse to, be outside their comfort zone and say, oh, well, I didn't choose to play as some sort of butch lesbian, but, well, if that's what the game's about, then I suppose.
Question.
My sort of bugaboo in this area, it's I understand why the marketing is okay, we're gonna have this, we sort of white lantern jaw guy in the ads, right? You can't fight the marketing department without killing them all. It's hard. But this even goes down to the in-games that are customizable. What's the thing? It's going to be lantern jaw white guy as the default, right? But why can't you have 12 random or curated ones across a variety of genders and colors and be we're gonna roll a dice and give you this one, and you can change one of the presets. But why can't it be a random preset that nobody's gonna return the game because it's well, it gave you a black woman, so screw you, right?
Personally, I would love to see things go in that direction. It's kind of a hard position of, the gaming industry itself, the people who work in it, are overwhelmingly straight white dudes. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had where I've pointed something out, and the reaction is, oh, just never would have thought about something from that perspective.
One of the stories that I heard was there was a game where maybe there was a gender flag of a character, and it's a Boolean, so it's true or false. And they just, without thinking, made the false value be women. And that says things, whether you want it to or not,
Yeah.
about the mentality of what's going on in the play.
Yeah. Volition hired an outside company to run some focus tests for us. And, we were okay, yeah, with, wide net. We want to test with all sorts of different types of people. And it was when we were reviewing some of the initial surveys that we realized that in the recruitment survey, they automatically disqualified anyone who was a woman.
What?
We were just well, why? Well, the response from this professional company was, oh, well, we normally only run our tests with males. And we were but why? And we quoted sorts of numbers, you're like, the gaming entertainment, the most recent survey says 40-some% of gamers are women. Microsoft is saying around 45% of people with Microsoft, with Xbox Live profiles are women. I'm like, we know that women make up a huge chunk of the audience as gamers in general, and then we're Saints Row, we're not known for being particularly exclusionary. I'm sure we have a lot of lady gamers in our fan base. And it was just kind of the response of, oh, this is just how we've done it. I guess if you want, we'll test with women. And we said, well, yes. And it's like, it's just that it's so entrenched, this idea of who the that every gamer is a straight, white, 18-year-old guy. And no, that is not what most gamers look like. But it's so hard to kind of fight this overwhelming, developers are overwhelmingly male and they come from things from a male perspective, and they're overwhelmingly Caucasian and they come from things from a Caucasian perspective. And then even outside vendors like this Focus Test company come from things from this really entrenched perspective. And it's hard to fight against that sometimes. Volition is great and diverse in many ways, but it's still 80% male. Where I try, but it's hard sometimes being like the spokesperson for all people, that I have to be the one person in the room who has to be like, actually that kind of sucks, can we try something different? But basically what it comes down to is I would love to see more things like that. People inside of the industry are pushing for it. I personally think the industry as a whole is moving that direction. It just can be hard to go against the flow of the tide sometimes, so it can be a little delayed.
And also for indies, you can just tell them.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty likely that they just didn't think about it. Like when I was thinking about this panel, I thought about my older projects. One of them that I did in high school is Black Shades, which had a procedural city where you go around trying to protect a VIP. And I was looking at it, and the city is populated entirely by white men. And it's creepy.
Wait, we can just put them all in one place?
What's weird is nobody ever mentioned that to me. If someone's making a game and it's all super racist and sexist like that, then you should tell them.
I thought it was an interesting point what you just said when it came to the people doing the research automatically excluded women from the survey. How much do you think that has a role to play in terms of opening up the spectrum to being inclusionary for all different genders and all different sexualities in a situation like this? And when it comes to marketing, research, and advertising, because we focus a lot on the development cycle, but who we advertise to and how we advertise is going to play a role in terms of showing that these are people who play these games too.
I think that's huge as well. I speak from the Saints Row perspective. If anyone's familiar with the history of Saints Row, they will know that we came from a very porn star-based marketing perspective. It wasn't my personal favorite, but that's what our marketing team said was the way to go to market our game. Let's put porn stars in it, quite literally. In Saints Row 2, we had a special DLC pack entirely about Tara Patrick, a porn star. She was in our game for Saints Row 3. We went the same route again. We had a whole DLC pack that was Penthouse Pets. Yeah. I'm like, I'm completely happy with these women having fantastic jobs and hopefully being successful, and I have no problem with porn stars as people. My problem was that our marketing department said, this is obviously, TNA is the only way to market our game. When obviously we have a lot more to offer than just that. Since we are now under new management, we were owned by THQ. THQ went bankrupt. We are now owned by Deep Silver out of Germany, and our new corporate management seems a lot more open to not going for just porn stars. So yeah, but I think it's really important. Yeah, I think it's really important though to acknowledge that who we're marketing to and who we're making games for is a really diverse group of people, and going for the same trite idea of who a gamer is over and over fails. Like, if we're only doing focus tests with, men, then we're obviously going to be missing something. If we're only doing focus tests with straight people, we're obviously going to miss something. And it will just be a snowball effect of, oh, well, this game doesn't appeal to women, but we didn't actually consult any women on the making of the game. So, but small percentage of women played it, so obviously we don't need to focus test with them in the future. You know, it just is a cycle that just feeds on itself. And so it does need people to basically say, this is wrong, can we do something different this time?
The other thing that can happen in a larger company is that it will actually be just one small subset of the team that does a thing. I had this recently happen where I work at Living Lab, where basically 2 guys worked on a feature. It wasn't presented to the rest of the company until it was too late in the process, and everybody was like, hey, this is kind of sexist and we don't like it. And they're like, oh, well, our deadline is next week, so we have to patch it, basically.
Yeah.
But, and it's one of those things where it's like, the voices are there, but sometimes you don't get the input in the right time in the process. But it's getting, I think it is getting better because you get the chance eventually to say, hey, no,
Yeah.
don't do that.
I was saying that the funny thing about the porn star example is that even in that instance, it's also specifically one type of porn star.
Yes.
You could be diverse even within their own porn stars.
Yeah, I argue that if we were gonna have penthouse pets, I'm like, where are the burly dudes and, you know,
Yeah.
and Speedos? I'm like, that would make me happy. You know, a nice balance there. But my opinion was small in company.
It seems like in Saints Row 4, you kind of have a case study against the whole sort of laziness issue, or it's too much work to put inclusive things in games issue of, you know, we can't animate women, that's too hard. Or you could just make a game where any, you know, using through that perspective, whatever character you are, whatever sexuality, whatever gender, whatever color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We just make the same thing for you, so everybody's equal. It seems like that's like almost kind of a perfect way of getting around that without having to pander to, you know, whatever, 18 to 35 color point.
Yeah. Basically, the way I look at it is, at Volition, we treated our customization system as a crucial feature to our game. So early on in pre-production and production, it was always planned for. You know, there was time and resources and money devoted to this system because it was a crucial system. You know, if weapons are crucial to your game, you make sure you have the time and development to get those weapons in. If you treat customization and having playable character options as crucial to your game, then it will happen. If you treat it as an extra that maybe we can add on at the end if we have time, you know, number of you raise your hands as game developers, you know you never have time. There is always deadlines that you are hitting way too early, and you're never going to have this extra mythical time to add things. And if you as a company deem it crucial to your player experience on the game to have diversity for your player characters, it will happen. You know, customization isn't easy, it isn't cheap, it's resource intensive, you have to have skilled people working on your team to pull it off. But if you think that this is important to this game you're making, you'll make it happen.
One note about animation is retargeting an animation to a female character is really quite trivial. Like, there was a blog post by John Cooper, the lead animator on Assassin's Creed 3, who was saying that it would be about an hour of work. Like, they were saying that they couldn't do it for Unity, but like he did it for a DLC in like literally an hour. Because like they had 50 full-time animators on the Assassin's Creed animation team. It's not a challenge for them. It's not like they're changing into a giant ogre or like a spider or something.
Basically spiders.
Spiders.
What do we even do with all the other legs?
I have ideas.
Yeah.
So I had a question about writing in particular, because you're working on sort of like interactive novels. Like, how do you approach writing for more diverse characters?
What the writing comes down to like every single character I write, they have a different perspective on like what the player's gender or sexuality or perspective is. Some characters, just like in Analog, Shawnee does not really care if you're a man or woman or not. She's head over heels for you regardless. It never influences what she says at all. Whereas the other character is very sort of comes from a patriarchal background. The player as a woman can still romance her, but her dialogue is actually like, there's basically 2 versions of every line she has. It was really extensive, but this is because this is a character that gender is super important to. So it's important that's reflected in the character. So I think really it just entirely depends on what your game is about. If you're making a game about medieval patriarchy, the player's gender might be extremely important to writing. If you're making an epic space opera about saving the universe, it's probably not going to be too relevant. So really, that's just what it comes down to. And at the same time, it was very easy to, to find a time to make these writing differences because they're just like fundamental to the character. Like you won't understand where this person is coming from unless you can actually see from both perspectives. And I think that's like super interesting that you don't see in a lot of games. They just assume that one player, like it's just the player's default perspective. That's like the valid one. It's not really. Maybe you'll try through with like evil morality. You shoot everyone, which doesn't really. I don't know. I don't think that really tells you anything quite as interesting as actually like exploring characters from how they feel about gender.
Makes sense. Like it seems to me that a lot of games, they have like a very specific character. Like even in something that's very story driven like The Last of Us, it doesn't actually matter that Joel is a white guy. Like if they swapped him with Tess or anything else like that, it wouldn't really make any difference to the lines that they say. It would just look slightly different. So it'd be cool to see more of that in story-driven games also, I think.
I mean, it's great to have community or expressing yourself by create your own character. But I wonder, what do you think about the fact that you can change your character's sexual orientation and colors and live in your change in the world changes? Does that kind of throw a blind eye to the fact that the world does treat you differently based on how you look and stuff like that? So I guess it's perpetuating that.
I think that's kind of a different, I mean, since most games are just about killing people, in those cases it doesn't, yeah, but for a more intricate game, like if you have something like Gone Home, it would make a huge difference if you changed who they are. Or if you look at any movie, like Forrest Gump or whatever, if you changed him with a really smart, like black lesbian, the story wouldn't make any sense at all. So I think if we can expand where games are at, then it would definitely make more sense for it to make more of a difference. But if we still have games that are all about just shooting people in the face, then we might as well make it customizable again.
There was a game recently that came out called Always Sometimes Monsters. And you can make your character gay or trans or a racial minority. And in fact, dialogue options you get, it will actually treat you poorly if you're a gender, sexual, or racial minority in that game. And explores oppression and bias a lot in a really good way.
That sounds cool. We should check that out.
I think the trick here is that you don't want to be playing, like treating your players like shit just because they're women, for example. Like, if straight men in the audience like get this amazing experience and they don't realize that they're getting the amazing experience compared to everyone else, you're not really doing anything interesting. You're just actually perpetuating, oppression. It's so, like something I've done in my games is that for this character that gender is very important to her. There's an achievement in the game for playing as both a man and as a woman, and she treats you terribly as a woman and great as a man. And I thought it was important that the male players realize that this is a very different experience. So there's an achievement in it for getting both perspectives, and that way you realize. Because otherwise the straight player is definitely just going to go, oh, well, she's great. I never got mistreated by her. You must be making it up.
I think it's a good point also to have different characters treated differently, or have a game with a very specific story that's like about being mistreated. Because I think games are a very powerful way to convey empathy, more so than films or books, because you're not hearing someone else's story, you're kind of becoming that person. So that would definitely be the next step, is to actually have games that are specifically about the plight of different oppressed minorities.
I'll also add, there is a really good John Scalzi article that was comparing privilege and being born a straight white male as being life's easy mode, which I think is a really interesting comparison, but like it's important to remember, like when you're starting a video game, you know you're playing on easy mode. So if you're going with this metaphor, if you are giving a game that does have the advantage of the easy mode in terms of straight white male players are treated better, it does need to be explicit, otherwise you'll need to read tons of articles to even be convinced that privilege actually exists. Which again, just perpetuating the problem, really.
There is one way in the back.
I'll just stand up. You know, in the games industry, I think a lot of games over time, diversity meant like either A, having diverse characters that were secondary, like NPCs, or going the customizability route where like they're interchangeable. You know, you can take one person and substitute another protagonist that's different, but doesn't change the experience of the game. But I think it's very important for us to have narratives where the identity is important, even if the game doesn't revolve around the identity, that the identity is kind of incidental, but it's still important to who that person is. And I think we've started doing that with games like, I was kind of interested by Walking Dead. Lee Everett is a black male protagonist, and Tomb Raider, like for a series that has been known for TNA for so long, the latest one actually, I think Lara Croft is a pretty strong female protagonist. And I was wondering, what can we do to like still have it be marketable, still have people be interested in these games, but have them play people that they might not have played otherwise, other than the cis white dude.
I think that it's basically like a myth that straight white guys can't play games that don't feature straight white guys, that they'll be totally turned off by it, they'll be running out of the stores. Oh no, you can't force me to buy this. But we end up with this problem of, companies that are owned by, with shareholders and marketing teams being very angry about things in general. And so, we just have this assumption built into it that, oh, well, you have to go with that scruffy white protagonist that everybody already knows and loves. He's won all the wars. He's it's just, and I think that basically gamers need to speak with their wallets when there are games that come out that have done it right.
Yeah.
And it's like if you find a new game that has a protagonist who's not a straight white guy, tell all your friends, shout it from the rooftops, reward that game developer as much as possible and give them feedback. Let them know, not only am I a fan of your game, I'm a fan of your game for this specific reason. I also do some of our community management, in addition to being a player experience researcher, and I frequently find myself in a position of trying to say, fans like this thing. And the response from our team is, how do you know for sure? It's like people want concrete information. And then sometimes I'll be able to reply, and here's some fan mail, and here's some fan mail, and here's some fan mail. Here are direct quotes from the people buying our games saying, we like these things about your games, we want more of this. And so basically, be an evangelist for games that are doing it right. I try even as a developer to do it. Any game I come across that I'm like, I like something they're doing, I will share it, on all my social media channels and try and draw attention to it. Because the problem is that inside of the industry, it can be very closed, especially when you're talking about the bigger studios, the AAA studios. It can be very closed and hard to get the message in. So that would be my recommendation from my perspective, is that if you're a fan of something, let people know.
Also, if you're an indie developer, then you can just do it. Persuade anyone. It is tricky with the box office. Like, if you look at sales of games that don't feature the straight white buzz cut guy, a lot of them don't do very well. It's probably for different reasons. But I think it scares people off, like Beyond Good and Evil or Mirror's Edge.
I don't mean to dominate here. So the self-fulfilling prophecy I've seen with that is that marketing assumes that the game that has a female protagonist won't sell as well. So they put less money in the marketing for it, which means it doesn't sell as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's what happens. And like, why didn't it sell as well? Well, we didn't spend as much money on it.
Yeah. I think indie is a good space to kind of break out of that because they can do whatever they want.
There's the marketing department.
There's no marketing. And then when they make a game that like sells super well, then everyone else can copy it. Like now, everyone might copy Gone Home, and we'll see more games like that, like the interactive stories, hopefully.
And we're seeing that a lot more with large AAA companies starting these small kind of projects where they get indie developers to make these games that provide that opportunity for people to kind of reach out. I think of that game company that came out with Journey and what's going on with Nintendo right now with they're kind of taking a leaf off of Sony. Do you know if there are projects like that going on in your own guys' companies or anything like that? In terms of trying to build indie developed games where the developers have more free reign to do what they want, especially when it comes to that kind of expression?
Not at Volition. The hard thing most people outside of Volition don't realize is we're actually kind of small. We're only 200 people, which to an indie developer sounds like a massive amount of people. But compared to most AAA studios, the headcount we have, the budget we have to work with, and the time frames that we have to turn our games out in is really small. So Volition has to be really strongly focused on basically one, maybe two projects at a time, but if we're doing two projects, we're really stretched. So unfortunately, that's not something that Volition is engaged in right now, though I would love to see that happen.
There's definitely a lot of big companies that are trying to find indie studios in general. Like Humble Bundle has done a little bit of that, and Double Fine and Sony. Sony's always looking for indie developers now after their success with that game company. So it's definitely a lot easier to get an indie game funded than it ever was before. Way in the back.
The absolute back. You can't go any farther back. So I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I think for me, at least, I have this tension all the time with being gay. It matters all the time. Like, you can't shut it off. It's always influencing me in some way, but there's occasionally days where I'm just like, God, can I not deal with this bullshit for 5 minutes, please? And like, I was thinking about I don't know how many of you were at the Gearbox talk before, but they kind of sold the idea that they want to make queer characters where it's not, they don't do what David Gator said before, it's like walk in the room, hi, gay here, right? So, but I feel like how do you manage that tension when you're making inclusive design, right? And I think this applies not just to gender and sexuality, but to race, ability, all sorts of things, because we have this constant tension between I never want it to matter, like I would just like 5 seconds off, but it always matters, and how do you handle that?
I just hope that, developers, try to find a balance there within, amongst themselves. Like, some people can make games about escapism, where all they really want to do is romance cute ladies, and other people can focus on, what the heavy issues are. I've gone between both. I've made games about medieval patriarchy, which is, about as focused on gender issues as you can possibly get. And after working on that for 2 years, I'm kind of burnt out on it, and I want to do escapism. So I'm hoping basically people will just do their time making games about serious subjects, so then we can go back to everything is just escapist. Well, I mean, there's a lot of value in both. I think both are extremely important, and it's just as important, to educate people on gender issues as it is to actually give lesbians a chance to kiss girls in games. Because they're both
I think it's also somewhere that allies could help, hopefully. Just do the research and make games about the harder issues that other people might not want to deal with, because they're dealing with all the time.
And I completely understand what you're saying, that you want to sometimes create this character and defining them, but you don't want to beat people over the head with this character. That I want to have this character be a person of color, but I don't want to do it because, hey look, I made a person of color. I should get praise from everybody in the game development community because I I'm acknowledging that this is an area that's lacking. You know, and it's hard. And basically what it boils down to is just making sure whoever it is doing your writing, if you're an indie, you, if you're a larger company, your writing team that has their own little office, just making sure that whoever's writing your story is focusing on telling a story about a well-rounded person who has many aspects to their personality, of which their gender and their sexuality and the color of their skin is just one of them. And I think the more we as developers focus on just telling the good stories about interesting people, that will kind of sometimes accidentally create an awesome gay character. We're not doing it because they're gay, we're just doing it because that character's really cool and we want to make sure that everybody, we highlight this person. And so it's just about trying to find the balance, basically. And of course, I'm speaking from the perspective of Volition, where everything we do is escapism. We never do subjects. Just look at our games.
I do think the important thing isn't that you're not talking about serious subjects, but the idea of having multifaceted characters is super important. Even in a comedic farce, you still don't want characters to be completely one-dimensional. That's frequently not funny. It's frequently grating, especially when you're making a video game, which is 7 to 40 hours long. If you're going to be spending this much time with characters, they better have a lot going on with them. There's never an excuse to have single-dimensional characters, especially if they're minorities.
Yeah.
It reminds me of what George R. Martin said when someone asked how he wrote such interesting female characters, and he said he just wrote them as if they're people. Apparently, some writers' job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of part of the effect of the question from back there is, in general, when you're for example, I'm a developer at a video company, and I run into these situations every now and then when we make these decisions within the game, and I have to be the one person saying, you probably shouldn't do that. And it's sometimes I feel that I end up being that girl making that comment all the time, because you think they keep coming up there over and over again. So how do you handle not, I understand not wanting to be that person all the time, but also not wanting to just let things slide.
That's definitely something that I deal with a lot personally. It's a personal struggle for me because I don't want to always be the combative bitch, basically. The person that's always yeah, sorry, but maybe we need to rethink this thing. But it happens a lot. I'm trying to speak from a perspective that most of the people in my company don't have. And basically, part of it is picking and choosing my battles. And I'm I just try and pick the topics that I'm this is really important to me. This thing, yeah, we've got some strippers hanging out in the, over there in the corner in our game. Okay, fine. I'm not gonna touch on the strippers, but when a rough draft of a mission maybe has something that to me seems like it's verging on encouraging violence against women, I'm that's the thing that I'm really going to make a big deal about. And then sometimes, it's nice because I can put on my user experience researcher hat and I can kind of say, I'm insisting on this change. I don't have to argue about it. I don't have to convince someone of it. And it's nice to have a role where I can do that. An example would be in Saints Row 4, up until very close to ship, there were NPCs who would refer to the main character as Mr. President, regardless of the gender. And I was well, that's dumb. It's since a lot of people are going to be playing as a female character, can we not? And and basically I got to kind of say from a player experience perspective, this is bad. So let's make sure this gets changed. But it is like I said, it's something I struggle with. I haven't found a really great solution to it yet, and it's just something I try on a day-to-day basis, try and find that balance. And definitely sometimes I get weary, basically, of being the lone person trying to speak from a female perspective in a room. But I think it's really important that there is that female perspective in the room, and so I don't just sit down and shut up.
The thing that I've also found is that as I speak up more, the other women and other minorities that are they are there.
Yeah.
There are a few of us, and a lot of times you are kind of the only voice in the room. But the more that any one of us speaks up, the more it creates a space for others to speak them, and I like deliberately seek out those people at my company who I know, like, think about these things and care about them, and like, get us all, like, we're gonna lobby from within this company to make sure that, you know, we try and keep things on track towards a better process. And then when you have a voice in the hiring process too, like, I'm always going to go for people that are gonna make it a more diverse place, like, always.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Finding the people you work with who can support you and can be their voice of their, of their own as well.
This is like extremely important, not just for big studios, but especially for indie developers, because we have a tendency to, you know, only hire friends, which is kind of problematic if you only, you know, are friends with people who are like you. It's definitely very hard to get at least in you know, a big studio hiring process. There are ways to do that, but it's something you need to be very aware of while a small developer.
Yeah, it can be hard to get feedback from people who are different. Like, I'm working in this kind of indie space provided by Double Fine, and almost everyone there is also a white dude. So it's a little bit challenging sometimes to find other voices.
Something I struggle with myself, but just the general idea of tokenism versus sort of writing, creating, and all the things that go into the creative process. How do you make a character that matters and doesn't feel like?
I feel like a lot of people worry about token characters, but it's substantially better to have a token character than to not try at all. Like I feel like if you're worrying about this, you need to be actually like at least trying, because otherwise it's just silly. like being afraid of having an inconsequential character that is at least like representing someone. If you can't even do that, like I feel like this is definitely a thing in, you know, big game development, is that there's this aversion to risk. And like if your failure state is that you have made a character that doesn't provide anything to the story, that's still better than not trying. And at least like then you can like receive feedback, you can solicit opinions, you can look at what the reviews say, and you know, unfortunately it's not that far. Whereas if you don't try at all, there's not much you can do.
Yeah, and I would say you learn more from failing than from a success, because you get tons of feedback when you fail. Everyone is happy to share their opinions with you.
And listen to them.
Yes, and listen to them, because sometimes they're just angry, ranting fanboys, but sometimes, a lot of times, there's meat in there. And you know what, I'll look at the Saints Row series, and it started off playing very heavily on stereotypes. You could, you know, oh, look, it's just another, you know, African-American gangbanger on the streets. And we were totally guilty of that. I stand back, yes, bad things happened in earlier Saints Row games. But we didn't run away from it. We've tried to embrace it. We've tried to say, well, we're gonna take this character who started off as nothing but a kind of shitty stereotype, and we're going to expand that character in later games. And we're gonna give that character a deeper backstory. And sometimes, you know, it's nice when you have many sequels to work with to, you know, be able to have this opportunity, but, you know, we made mistakes, we learned from them, and we kind of embraced these characters we created and basically tried to make them more than just tokens, more than just stereotypes, to just make them full, well-rounded characters.
There's always that static friction at first. Like the conservative writers that don't care about having diversity, and the more progressive writers might be afraid of doing it wrong. But you kind of just have to do it anyway and do your best and try and ask people.
That's what first drafts are for. You screw it up once, that's how writing works. You make a first draft, it sucks. You find out why. Sometimes that's syntactical errors, sometimes that's you're accidentally kind of racist. Both these things need to be fixed, and they can be fixed.
I think one of the things that's interesting is like a forced perspective shift. I mean, and I'm thinking there's a moment, and like you say, well, you know, do you make specific content if your character is a specific way, or do you have it be the same so that it doesn't matter about your gender or your skin color or your sexuality or whatever. And those are all complicated, but if you do a forced perspective shift, you can be like, hey, there's a moment here where I can actually like show a little thing. You don't want to get like an after school special, like, now we're going to learn what it's like to be, a disabled person. but but I think like is that like that one moment in Mass Effect 2 where you're like even playing as your chef one way or another for the whole game, and then very briefly you play as somebody else, and it like and have different characteristics, and you're like, oh, right, like even inside this game world, like it acts a little differently now, and it was actually surprisingly effective, and not as complicated as like how do we work this through every NPC, tree and decision tree and graphics and everything else like that.
There's definitely very few stories and games that wouldn't be improved by having more perspectives in them. I mean, like this is always more interesting. We have a lot of, we have a lot of cliches in games that don't ever get interrogated because we only see them from one angle constantly.
I think in Overgrowth we're going to end up having a sort of ensemble cast, so a bunch of different characters. Partly for that reason, though there's only so far we can go with a cast of like rabbits and cats and things. But it should be more interesting. It's also really difficult to write a story where it justifies one character killing like 600 guys. Like the Last of Us tells you stats at the end, and that's actually how many people I murdered while I was playing through it. But writing like 10 stories where you kill 60 guys.
I think I'm being
Well, yeah, we have a few minutes left. Do we have any like final questions? We covered everything. All right.
Well, I just wanted to mention the experience. I was like, as I worked on Remember Me, when we were hearing all the stories before, they were talking about in the news about how they had shit that they had tried to sell the characters in the game around, and studios wouldn't, publishers wouldn't buy it because it's a woman, and they're like, oh, you can't have a woman, you have to change it to a man, and then we'll publish your game. And I was working on the game, and I was just really worried that if this game doesn't sell because we didn't think it was good, we thought it was all right, it had some promise. We were scared that if it didn't sell, that everyone's going to see, it has a woman and she's half black, and you can't do that in video games. It's terrible. So that was just like this concern we had like bubbling around to our office about.
Yeah, it's worth the thing. All right, I guess that's the last question in the back there. Where?
Yeah.
Oh, well, so thinking about like creating racial diversity, because I find that some of the best racial diversity media comes when like A Different World is a show that has a story, and the entire cast is black, and they're all different people, but it's informed also by the fact that it's a lot of black writers, and Bill Cosby's a part of the creation of it. And video games generally always, like almost 99.9% of the time, either cast black characters off to the side, or if you can make your own character, then your character still isn't really a black character, they're just the amorphous blob avatar that you formed into being something. So I think maybe that could change. Like, do you ever think like looking and trying to find more people to write for you or inspire all that, or just trying to flip a switch, or?
Having more diversity in the creative team is a huge thing, and it's a great place to start. And it's just, it can be really hard to offer a perspective that's really foreign to the one that you grew up with. And I completely agree that frequently, black characters kind of get just either fall into the stereotype trap, or they're just completely like neutral, basically. And that's a huge problem that faces a lot of minority characters that people are trying to put into video games. And, it's just, I think that more people getting into the field, especially now that the indie scene is bursting open, more people creating games, more diversity behind the scenes basically will go a long way towards increasing the amount of diversity we see in games.
I'm talking about that on Sunday at 4 p.m.